Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started.
Today's 75 basis point increase is an unusually large one.
Our focus tonight is on the state of the economy. That one thing that affects all of us, no matter which part of the world you're watching us from, a global inflation is bound to hit your household. In America, inflation is at a 40-year high. Prices of food and fuel are rising every month. U.S. finance giant Wells Fargo says a recession is inevitable. It says 2023 will be the year of recession in America. If America falls into recession, will the world be far behind? U.S. Federal Reserve has announced its biggest interest hike since 1994. In the UK, the Bank of England has also raised interest rates. So did the Swiss National Bank. More than 50 central banks have increased rates so far this year by at least 0.5%. Headlines like these are often complicated, so tonight we're going to try and break it down for you. We will tell you what the current state of economy means for you and me, and what it means for your household budget. All of this and more coming up on the show tonight.
They're really trying to catch up, but everyone knows that it's still far too little too late.
I think it was a bold decision for the Fed. I'm not sure it was fully necessary.
Have you heard about Paul Volcker? He was the 12th chair of the U.S. Federal Reserve. He served from 1979 to 1987. His biggest achievement? Crushing inflation in the United States, and I mean literally crushing it. A year after Volcker took office, U.S. inflation topped 14.8%. For comparison, at the moment it's 8.6%. In 3 years, Volcker turned it around. By 1983, U.S. inflation had dropped to 3%. How did that happen? From 14.8 to 3%. It was all thanks to Paul Volcker's aggressive interest hikes. But why are we talking about him now? Because America is facing another Volcker moment. Inflation is at a 40-year high. Fuel and food prices are rising every month, so all eyes are on the U.S. Federal Reserve and its chairman, Jerome Powell. On Wednesday, he announced the latest interest hike, 75 basis points or 0.75%. It's the biggest increase since 1994.
Clearly, today's 75 basis point increase is an unusually large one, and I do not expect moves of this size to be common. From the perspective of today, either a 50 basis point or a 75 basis point increase seems most likely at our next meeting. We will, however, make our decisions meeting by meeting, and will continue to communicate our thinking as clearly as we can.
Not quite a full Volcker moment, probably Volcker light. There are two big takeaways from this announcement. A, the Fed is panicking. They have admitted that inflation is spiraling out of control. And B, economic growth will be hit. That's a foregone conclusion now. The U.S. is bracing for a period of falling GDP and unemployment. The question is, what shape will this take? Will it be a slowdown? Or will it be a full-blown recession? U.S. finance giant Wells Fargo says recession is now inevitable. That 2023 will be recession year in the U.S. And if America falls into recession, the whole world will follow. The Fed is trying to prevent that, to control inflation and to prevent recession at the same time. Let's understand how. By raising interest rates, the Fed is trying to reduce money supply. It is trying to suck liquidity out of the economy. But that does not happen overnight. Money supply takes time to correct, which means higher inflation could persist in the U.S. It's not going away anytime soon. And if that is the case, what does the Fed do? What will their next move be? That's what the stock markets are interested in. Will there be more hikes or not? And if yes, by how much? The Fed chairman did in fact drop a hint on Wednesday. He said a 50 to 75 basis point hike is likely in July. He gave no indications of a 1% hike, and that's when the markets rebounded. The Dow Jones closed 1% up. Nasdaq was up 2.5%. Standard & Poor closed 1.4% up. Why are the markets cheering this Fed move? Because of three reasons. Number one, the Fed has finally admitted that there is a problem, the problem of inflation. And that has calmed down investors a bit. Reason number two, the markets had factored in a 75 basis point hike. After the inflation data last week, investors were expecting this move. So this is not a surprise. And number three, the Fed chair said he did not expect such hikes to be common. So the markets breathed a sigh of relief. Across the world, central banks are doing the same thing. The Bank of England raised interest rates by 25 basis points today. It was their fifth consecutive hike. So did the Swiss National Bank. Their lending rate was minus 0.75%. It has been bumped up to minus 0.25%. And this is very significant for Switzerland. Their last interest hike was almost 15 years back. So the global economic pressures are forcing everyone to act. More than 50 central banks have increased rates this year. By how much? At least 0.5%. This includes India, Australia, the US, England, all major economies in the world. So that is what the big picture looks like. But what does it mean for you? How will all of this impact your monthly budget? Here in India, there's another worry, and that's called imported inflation. Let me explain how it works. The Federal Reserve's actions have strengthened the US dollar. The data should make it clear. By the start of May, the US dollar was trading at 76.5 rupees. $1 was equal to 76.5 rupees. Now $1 equals 78 rupees. And what happens when your local currency weakens? Your imports become more expensive. You must spend more rupees, more money, to buy the same quantity abroad. And that includes everything: fossil fuel, food, cooking oil, cars. Whatever you import is going to cost more. So India will now have to pay more for imports. And that is called imported inflation. Another problem in India is the exodus of foreign investors. The rupee does not excite them anymore. So they're pulling money out of Indian markets. Again, let's look at the data. In 2021, foreign investors pumped 25,000 crore rupees into the Indian markets. That's not total investments, that's net investments, 25,000 crores. This year, they have pulled out 1.9 lakh crore rupees. And remember, we are only in the month of June. By the end of this year, this figure could be bigger. And this fear is haunting emerging markets. India's Nifty closed more than 2% down. China's Shanghai Composite closed 0.6% down. The Hang Seng slid more than 2%. Clearly, investors are not confident. They fear something worse is around the corner, maybe a recession. The question is, have central banks done enough? They were trying out a soft landing, a sort of balancing act between taming inflation and avoiding recession. Have they achieved that? Well, they haven't yet. So far, inflation has continued to rise and economic output has continued to fall. And that needs to change. If the interest hikes work, inflation will start cooling down. Then central banks can loosen liquidity. They can allow more cash in the market. If not, we could be looking at steeper interest hikes, more EMI bills, slower growth. Back in the 1980s, Paul Volcker announced 4% hikes. Imagine that, 400 basis point hikes. But Volcker did not have to deal with an economy battered by a pandemic. Neither did he have to worry about a war in Europe. He risked a hard landing, and he made it. This time around, the global economy may not be so lucky. So the trends are quite clear. The global economy faces some tough times ahead. Conducting any economic activity will be difficult and more expensive. So what is the solution? Diversify. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Build more options. And India is doing that with Russia, working on more options to collaborate. Despite pressure from the West, India wants to trade more with Russia. India wants to go beyond importing oil. India wants to export goods to Russia. Quick question. What do countries need to trade with each other? Fundamentally, two things: trading routes, which is a way to move the goods, and banking channels, a way to pay for those goods. Western sanctions have completely disrupted the traditional way of doing business with Russia. Key Russian banks are no longer connected to the global banking network. The war has also affected movement of goods. So how will India do business with Russia? By building its own mechanisms. There is no other way. And that's exactly what India is up to. First, the trade routes. India already has an alternative in place. It is called the International North-South Transport Corridor, INSTC. This is basically a shipping route. It connects Russia to India via Iran. It can be used by Russia to export goods to India and vice versa, for India to export goods to Russia. This route is currently being tested. Russia recently dispatched a consignment from St. Petersburg. There were 2 containers of wood laminates that were dispatched. After leaving St. Petersburg, the shipment will transit through 3 stops. The first one is the Caspian port of Astrakhan. The second is the Iranian port of Anzali. And from here, the shipment will be loaded onto the trucks. It will be moved via road to the 3rd stop, which is the Bandar Abbas port. This is on the Strait of Hormuz. Here, the consignment will be loaded again on a ship. It will be delivered to India in Mumbai. This entire journey will take less than 25 days. Earlier, such a delivery from Russia to India took nearly 40 days. So once this route is operational, it will be the fastest way to move goods between Russia and India. It can effectively replace the Suez Canal route. So we have a trade route in place. What about banking channels? India has a plan for that too. It can pay Moscow in rupees for Indian goods. Here's what New Delhi can do. Right now, India has some deposits in Russian banks, the VTB Bank and the Spare Bank of Russia. Both are state-controlled banks. How much money does India have in these banks? About $2 billion. It's in Indian rupees, $2 billion. This can be used to pay for Russian imports. A team of Russian officials is visiting New Delhi. A plan could be finalized soon. Earlier, a rupee-ruble trading mechanism was being considered. But those plans might not work out because there's extreme volatility when it comes to the Russian currency. The ruble is highly volatile. So there is a possibility that all transactions between Russia and India could be done in the rupee moving forward. India needs a permanent paying system with Russia. It wants to boost its trade with Russia, especially exports. The total value of bilateral trade stands at over $13 billion. India's trade deficit with Russia is $6.61 billion, meaning India imports more than it exports. And India wants to close this gap. It is pursuing specific targets. India wants to export $2 billion worth of goods to Russia this year. $2 billion. What kind of goods? Pharmaceuticals, plastics, chemicals, home furnishings, rice, beverages like tea and coffee, even milk products. Basically, the kind of products that Russia earlier imported from the West. You see, the US and its allies have halted all of these shipments. And that's where India comes in, to plug the supply gaps, to give Russia what the West is not giving. And I know what you're thinking. The world is shunning Russia. So why does India want to trade with them? And there's a simple answer to this question. India's policy towards Russia is not defined by the Western view of Moscow. It is defined by realpolitik. The primary mission of Indian foreign policy is to further India's interests. A developing economy needs cheaper fuel. A developing economy needs a marketplace for its products. And that does not mean that you have to support Russia's actions in Ukraine. The invasion must be condemned. The fighting has to stop. But the global economy also needs to be stabilized. It is under distress. India needs to look out for itself, pursue the opportunities that present themselves. This is in the interest of India's economy and India's people. And talking about safeguarding interests, Poland too is looking out for itself. Warsaw fears that the war in Ukraine could spill over. A Russian mouthpiece has issued a threat. It says Poland is the next target for Russian troops. Now, Poland, we know, shares a border with Ukraine. It is also a member of NATO. But the Polish government is taking no chances. They want to strengthen their defenses. They've announced a plan to buy more weapons. The Polish Deputy Prime Minister has made a vow. He says he would prefer to be in debt rather than in Russian occupation. Here's a report.
Poland is sending a message to Russia. Polish Deputy Prime Minister Jarosław Kaczyński has taken a vow. He says Poland would rather remain in debt than under occupation. Just like some of its neighbors, Poland feels threatened by Russia, so it wants to spend big on its military. Earlier this week, Warsaw declared its plans. Poland has around 150,000 soldiers in its military force. It now plans to double those numbers. Polish soldiers will also be given new and state-of-the-art equipment, like 500 multiple rocket launchers, anti-ballistic missile systems, minesweepers, and multi-role helicopters. Russia's invasion of Ukraine changed everything for Poland. It shares a 529-kilometer border with Ukraine. Warsaw fears the conflict could easily spill over into Polish territory. This month, Poland received a chilling threat. It came in the form of a broadcast on a pro-Kremlin news outlet in Russia. The Russian anchor suggested Poland should be Moscow's next target.
Спецоперация России на Украине закончилась в том смысле, что началась самая настоящая война, причем война Третья мировая, и мы вынуждены заниматься демилитаризацией не просто Украины, а всего Североатлантического альянса.
So far, these threats have proved to be counterproductive for Moscow. Poland has been getting help from its NATO ally, the United States. America is strengthening Poland's defenses. After the crisis in Ukraine began, the US sent thousands of soldiers to Poland. By February, roughly 9,000 American troops were already stationed there. In the same month, Washington cleared a major defense deal. Poland will buy $6 billion worth of American weapons. This includes tanks, machine guns, and other military equipment. The crisis in Ukraine has raised Poland's profile in the region too. After the war began, Warsaw welcomed over 3 million Ukrainian refugees. Poland also helped India evacuate Indian students from Ukraine. Warsaw has also provided vital support to Kyiv. By April, Poland has provided Ukraine with over $1 billion worth of arms and ammunition. This includes lethal weapons like tanks, howitzers, and rocket launchers. Poland is effectively now a linchpin for NATO in the war against Russia. It is a vital part of Western plans to defend Ukraine and deter future Russian aggression. Poland has an important role to play on both fronts, but these responsibilities don't come without their risks. Warsaw has few options to mitigate those threats. It needs to arm itself and develop real deterrence to the Russian threats.
Three weeks after his inauguration, Joe Biden made a grand promise. It was about the war in Yemen. The U.S. had been arming the Saudi coalition for nearly 5 years. The war was being fought with American weapons. Joe Biden promised to stop that. The war has to end, he said. Listen in.
This war has to end. And to underscore our commitment, we are ending all American support for offensive operations in the war in Yemen, including relevant arms sales.
That was February 2021. More than a year has passed since then. Has Joe Biden ended U.S. assistance as he promised? According to a congressional watchdog, no, he hasn't. They say Biden has not done what he promised. Now, the U.S. government has a special agency designed to oversee their actions, sort of like a monitor. It's called the GAO, the Government Accountability Office. This agency has published a report on America's involvement in Yemen. What does it say? Two important things. Number one, Biden's promise to end U.S. assistance has not been met. And number two, America's involvement in crimes in Yemen are yet to be investigated. Let's first talk about the military assistance. Why has Biden not stopped it? Because his administration has found a loophole. The president, you see, had promised to not provide offensive weapons. He did not say anything about defensive weapons, which raises the question, how do you classify a weapon as offensive or defensive? Well, this question was put to the U.S. State Department, and no surprises. They could not provide an accurate answer. Let me quote from that report on what they said. State officials said They consider the threats posed to Saudi Arabia's borders and infrastructure when deciding which weapons are offensive and which are defensive. What does that even mean? This is as vague as possible. The US has been sending military assistance to the coalition since 2015. This includes missiles, training classes, aircraft maintenance. Their total assistance is worth nearly $54 billion, $54 billion in under 6 years. How did the coalition use these weapons? Were they used according to international law, or were they used to target civilians? The United States has no clue. In fact, let me go back to the report. This is what they say. Despite several reports that airstrikes and other attacks by Saudi Arabia and UAE have caused extensive civilian harm in Yemen, DOD, that is the Department of Defense, has not reported and state could not provide evidence that it investigated any incidents of potential unauthorized use of equipment transferred to Saudi Arabia or UAE. Let me translate that for you. America could not be bothered. They shipped lethal weapons to Saudi Arabia and the UAE. No oversight, no investigations. The coalition was free to use them however they pleased. Maybe civilians were killed with these weapons. Since 2015, the Saudi coalition has carried out 23,000 airstrikes in Yemen. And not all of them targeted military assets. Some hit wedding receptions. Others flattened schools and hospitals. Around 18,000 civilians were killed by coalition bombs. It's hard to imagine that none of them were American. 23,000 strikes and 0 US weapons. That sounds highly unlikely. So chances are US weapons were used to target civilians in Yemen. And what did Joe Biden do about it? Absolutely nothing. His officials did not even bother to investigate. What does that say about Biden's commitment to human rights? That it's not genuine. It's all about political convenience. During the campaign, he attacked Saudi Arabia's crown prince. He promised to make the kingdom a pariah. But next month, in the coming month, Biden is visiting that same Saudi Arabia. He's scheduled to meet Crown Prince MBS. And guess what they will discuss? Energy, politics, and according to the State Department, human rights.
So in every relationship, of course, we bring our values with us. And human rights is always on the agenda. Human rights is always on the table. So too are the interests of the American people. And these two things can be, and I would say must be, complementary.
You must appreciate the audacity there. Biden needs MBS, not the other way around. He needs Saudi Arabia to cool down oil prices, yet he plans to talk human rights in Jeddah. What's the point? Biden has already surrendered to MBS. He's making a presidential visit to a country that he promised to make a pariah. He's going to meet a leader who is reportedly not even taking his phone calls. There is no redemption from that, or from America's role in Yemen, or Iraq, or Afghanistan, or Libya. The list goes on. US weapons have killed countless innocent civilians, but every time they get a clean chit because they have appointed themselves judge, jury, and executioner. Compare that to how they treat other countries. There are special reports for everything. For religious freedoms, for human rights, for war crimes. But all those reports exclude one country, and that is the United States itself. In Yemen's case, the congressional report has exposed the double standard. But don't expect any consequences because, as always, the US military is above law and morals. And talking about military, India's armed forces are going through a major churn. This week, a new recruitment program was announced. It's called Agnipath. But the response has been far from ideal. Let me first show you some pictures from the state of Bihar. Protesters set a railway coach on fire. They blocked highways. They barricaded rail lines. Even some politicians and their residences were targeted. What explains this violent opposition? Apparently, these people are not happy with Agnipath. They were all eyeing jobs in the Indian military. But the new scheme makes that difficult. We'll discuss the protest in a bit, but first, let's tell you about the Agnipath scheme. There are 3 things that you must know about it. Number 1, it recruits aspirants in a specific age category, 17.5 to 21 years. That's what your age should be. Number 2, around 50,000 soldiers will be recruited every year, but not all of them will get permanent jobs. 25% of them will be retained, only 25%. The others will leave the forces after 4 years. And number 3, the soldiers who leave will not get a pension. They'll get a severance package, but no lifelong benefits. And that is the sticking point here. These protesters are not looking for any job. They want lifelong financial security. They want pension, health insurance, allowances. That's what they want from the government. Now, for a normal job, this is understandable. People like financial security. But does that apply for the army? You see, national security is not an employment guarantee scheme. The army's recruitment is based on national interest, not on the job market. And right now, India's interest is in cutting down expenses. The army spends way too much on pensions, and that is a fact. Almost 25% of their total budget is spent on pensions. The Agnipath scheme should help reduce that. It could divert money towards modernization. Does that make the scheme perfect? Of course not. We discussed some of the drawbacks on this show. Some army veterans have also voiced the same concerns. But is this the way to address them? By burning trains, by blocking highways? Nothing can justify the destruction of public property. And remember why they're doing this. These protesters are destroying public property for public sector jobs. The irony is not lost on anyone. All this outrage reveals a larger problem in India, a sort of obsession with government jobs. The question is why? The private sector pays better in most cases. They offer more creative opportunities. So why are Indians still obsessed with government jobs? Because of benefits. I'm talking about pensions, allowances, special subsidies, and not to mention job security. A government job is like the holy grail in India. You get one and you're locked in for life. The society too plays a big part in this. Private jobs are considered unstable and risky, but not government jobs. If you work for the government, you climb up the social ladder. Your neighbors and family respect you. Beyond these perceptions, is there any substantial benefit? It's hard to imagine, honestly. Most people point to pensions as the biggest benefit of a government job. But private jobs pay better overall. So that should offset the pension payments. The fact is, it all boils down to attitude. Do you want to use your skills to drive ahead? Or do you want to piggyback on public money? Because let's face it, stability is not everything, and it's important. If you're good at what you do, you will keep your job. And where does that leave the scope for growth in professional life? Indian youngsters must realize this. They cannot bet on government jobs alone. Let me in fact show you some data. India's central government has around 4 million sanctioned jobs. The state governments have a similar number. So put together, the Indian government employs more than 8 million people. What about the army? The Indian army has 1.4 million personnel. Nearly 60,000 of them retire every year. These figures are simply too high for a country like India. You have millions of students competing for limited spots. If they fail, they will try again the next year. But they will not try for private jobs. The question is, why not? After all, expanding government jobs is not a viable solution. Yes, you need people to keep the country running. But at what point do those people weigh down the country? India is dangerously close to that situation. So let me say this in conclusion. In this competitive world, nobody has the birthright to government employment, let alone employment for life. Your job will depend on your skill, your talent, your qualification. And remember this, the army's job is to protect Indian citizens, not necessarily to employ them. And now let's tell you about a conflict that you have probably never heard about. It's called the Whiskey War. It was a dispute between Canada and Denmark. For 50 years, they fought over a tiny island with bottles of alcohol. I'm not making this up. This week, Canada and Denmark finally ended their fight. Our next report tells you all about the truce.
It is a tiny, barren island. No one lives on it. But for 50 years, Canada and Denmark have fought to control it. Now the conflict has been finally resolved. Canada and Denmark have finally made their peace.
Now, today we're resolving a 50-year-old dispute. 26 foreign ministers have worked on this file. Yes, you can laugh. It's quite. It was something. And so we're ending the dispute that for many that many called the Whiskey War. And so I think it was the friendliest of all wars.
She is right. The Whiskey War could go down as the most polite territorial conflict in history. Throughout its 50-year-long history, not a single bullet was fired, and no lives were lost. Then what was the Whiskey War all about? The feud was over this small piece of land, the Hans Island. The area is just half a square mile. There is nothing significant about the Hans Island. It has no natural resources or strategic significance. The island is basically a giant piece of rock. But a debate about its ownership began in 1971. The Hans Island is right in the middle of Canada and Greenland, an autonomous territory of Denmark. In 1973, Canada and Denmark struck a deal. They decided to create a border through the strait. But they could not agree on who gets to keep the Hans Island. Both Canada and Greenland sit 18 kilometers away from it. So under international law, they both could claim it. In 1984, Canada began a battle to take over the Hans Island. It sent troops to the barren rock. The soldiers planted a Canadian flag on it, and they left behind a bottle of Canadian whiskey. Weeks later, Denmark responded. They replaced the Canadian flag with the Danish one, and the Canadian whiskey with a bottle of Danish schnapps. In the next 4 decades, both sides traded more friendly barbs and bottles of alcohol. The friendly whiskey war finally got over in Ottawa this week. Canada and Denmark will share the Hans Island. They ended the dispute with the final exchange of the finest alcohol from their homelands. The signing ceremony went beyond symbolism. The foreign ministers of Canada and Denmark brought up the invasion of Ukraine. They hoped their decision to make peace is noticed by Moscow.
It sends a message to the world, and also including President Putin, that when there are things that you're disputing over, you have to make the resolution based on international law, not by the law of force, but by the force of law, and also in constructive, conducive manner.
Good, perfect. Well, if you know that, it's going straight to the Museum of History.
Their spirit is admirable. Unfortunately, some disputes are harder to resolve.
Now, here's one thing that we keep telling you on the show. When it comes to climate, the world has not put its money where its mouth is. And leading the climate hypocrisy is the West, specifically the United States. It is the biggest greenhouse emitter in history, ever. America has been burning coal and natural gas for decades now. It is responsible for 40% of excess carbon emission. But it has refused to pay its climate debt. Now, India has taken this up. India is demanding compensation for climate damages. Our story tonight begins in Germany. A meeting was recently held there. Officials from around the world met. They were preparing for the next UN climate conference. It was here that India called out the West and asked them to pay for climate damages, pay for problems that India is suffering but are of the West's making. The unbearable summer, for example. Every day is 42 degrees Celsius in this part of the world. Yes, it's summer, but it's not supposed to turn India into a furnace. Delhi summers are usually anywhere between 36 to 38 degrees, or they used to be. But this year, parts of the city recorded temperatures up to 49 degrees. On a good day, it's above 42 degrees. People are suffering, so are crops. Heat waves, floods, droughts, extreme weather conditions cost us a lot. Every year, India is suffering a loss of about $87 billion because of extreme weather. $87 billion. Cyclone Amphan, for example, displaced 2.4 million people in India. This was in 2020. In the state of West Bengal alone, 13.6 million people were affected. The current heat wave is affecting more than 1 billion people. Mango production has fallen by as much as 70% in some parts of the country. Who will foot the bill for all of this? Rather, who should foot the bill? A 2015 Lancet study found that the United States is responsible for 40% of excess global carbon dioxide emissions, meaning more than its fair share of emission. The European Union is responsible for 29% of excess CO2 emissions. The G8 nations are responsible for 85%. Industrialized nations are responsible for 90% of excess emissions, and the global north for 92%. What is the global north? It includes these countries: the United States, Canada, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and Israel. By contrast, the global south is responsible for just 8% of excess global carbon dioxide emissions, and India is well within its fair share of limits. So India has every right to ask the West to pay for the mess they created, to bear the responsibility for driving climate change. An Oxfam study found that the richest 10% of the world's population is responsible for around 50% of the global emissions, and by now you know where this 10% lives. In which part of the world? So where is the national responsibility? The West loves to lecture others, to tell others to cut down emissions. Maybe it's time they acted themselves by investing in climate action. Maybe it's time they went beyond the loud climate promises they've been making. The Obama administration, for example, had pledged $3 billion. This money was supposed to help countries that were hardest hit by climate change. $3 billion. Do you know how much they invested? Only $1 billion. Then came Donald Trump, the climate denier-in-chief. He tore up this plan. He walked out of the Paris deal. Joe Biden pledged to be different, but that promise is still awaiting financing. In 2009, rich countries had pledged to raise $100 billion a year by 2020. The money was supposed to help developing countries, those suffering because of climate change. So I want to ask tonight, where is that money? The US is contributing less than 20% of its share of climate finance, and India is demanding climate accountability. It is demanding climate financing. This money will be used to carry out reconstruction, to compensate for crop losses and the loss of home and livelihood. Should other countries follow suit? Should they too ask the West to pay for climate damages? I don't see why not. Every developing country that is suffering from extreme weather, that is suffering from droughts, floods, famines, storms, rise in sea levels, or climate deaths should ask Western nations to compensate. Because why should we be paying for a crisis that the West whipped up? So we've spoken about the recession that is staring at the world. We've spoken about climate challenge. Let's also talk about a problem facing Mars. And that too is thanks to humans. The red planet is being littered. NASA has found trash on Mars. Who is going all the way to Mars to dump trash? Our next report tells you.
Welcome to 2022. This year, we've successfully found microplastics in snow. There's already plastic in fish in the deepest recesses of the ocean. There is plastic in Arctic ice. Also in human organs. There's plastic in a mother's womb. Now, human trash is falling from the skies. Not just that, human trash has reached the end of the Earth and beyond. Remember Perseverance? The NASA rover is on Mars, persevering to find signs of life. So far, it's found none. But look what it found stuck between two rocks. Human trash. See the silverish thing? That's it. This is a piece of foil. How did it end up on Mars? NASA sent it. The foil was part of the Perseverance spacecraft. When it crash-landed, the foil went waltzing around the red planet. The foil isn't the only piece of trash on Mars. See this picture? This is a discarded parachute. It lies on the floor of a Martian crater, testifying for how we've already begun contaminating a planet we plan to someday colonize. Then there is this piece of plastic, thought to be shed by NASA's Curiosity rover. This piece of litter dates back to 2012. We humans have a history of thrashing celestial bodies. Remember the Apollo program? It came to a close in 1972. The mission brought back some 800 pounds of moon rocks and lunar soil, but they also left behind a lot of things, like entire lunar roving vehicles. and dozens of scientific instruments. Why were they left behind? NASA said the Apollo missions had excess baggage, so they dumped things on the moon. You may call this a flip side of human exploration, or just a human habit. Wherever we go, we make it a point to litter. It does not matter if it's a market, the moon, or Mars. Look up in the skies. You may spot defunct satellites, burnt-up boosters, parachutes, even boots and screwdrivers. These are all parts of Earth's orbit, and we dump them there. The year, again, is 2022, and it's raining trash.
Back on Earth, let's take a look at what else is making news. This is Gravitas Global Headlines.
The leaders of Germany, France and Italy arrived in Kyiv in a show of support. Meanwhile, NATO ministers met to discuss the situation in Ukraine and a Latvian request for more troops, as well as to decide on the future military lineup on the alliance's eastern flank. According to a report by a US-based think tank, North Korea appears to be expanding its work at its nuclear test site to include a second tunnel, amid fears that it might conduct a nuclear test any day. Pakistan raised fuel prices once again. It's the third such hike in the last 20 days in a bid to cut on fuel subsidies, a precondition to secure an IMF loan. McDonald's will pay $1.3 billion in France to avoid a legal case over tax evasion between 2009 and 2020, under an agreement approved by a Paris court. A U.S. panel of experts has unanimously recommended COVID-19 vaccines for children under 5, paving the way for formal authorizations, with the first shots expected early next week. Saudi officials seized rainbow-colored toys and articles of clothing from shops in capital Riyadh as part of a crackdown on homosexuality, which is outlawed in the kingdom. The Australian government has committed to reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 43% by 2030 in fulfillment of a key election pledge. Emergency services battled several wildfires as Spain remained in the grip of an exceptional heat wave that has seen temperatures reach 43 degrees Celsius. The English Premier League has announced fixtures for the 2022-23 season. For the first time ever, there will be a 1.5-month-long mid-season break for the World Cup. No matches will take place between November 14th and December 25th. US Open organizers have suggested golfers who have signed up for the Rebel Live series could be banned for future stagings of the major. Former US Open champions Dustin Johnson and Bryson DeChambeau are among those who have been banned by the PGA Tour after committing to the Saudi-backed breakaway, but can compete at this year's US Open.
With that, it's a wrap. We're leaving you with Gravitas Images. Thanks for watching.